We'll look at Romans chapter 6. Romans 6:13. We've heard some good, wonderful testimonies about those who have been healed. I'd like to change the subject a little bit. And we're going to look into what it means to be yielded. They probably don't talk about that down at the brickyard, but might be worth something anyway. 6:13, starting in the middle of the verse, it says, "But yield yourselves unto God, as those that are alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness unto God." Amen. Being yielded. You know what it means to yield? When I get in the car with my wife, she hates to drive on the freeways. And in fact, we drove together here a few days ago to Emmanuel Hospital, and she wanted to know, now how do we get there without going on the freeways? And of course, you can do it easily. I usually don't do it that way, but I showed her how to get there without going on the freeways, because she doesn't like to merge. She doesn't like, I could say she doesn't like to yield, but that might not seem favorable. And it's not really true. She's afraid when she gets on that merging lane that, you know, what happens if somebody doesn't yield? Well, if I understand it right, it's the responsibility of the one merging to do the yielding. Now, the reason for that is ordinarily the person driving down the freeway, if the party merging is on his right, you would think the person merging then under ordinary laws would have the right of way. But what happens if you yield, which you're supposed to do, you are forfeiting your rights to have the right of way. So you know what yielding is. I also have seen it in parliamentary procedure. I'm a little bit familiar with that because I was an FFA in high school. It's Future Farmers of America. And one of the things that we studied of all things was parliamentary procedure. And we studied Robert's Rules of Order. He's a man who was born 100 years ago or so and wrote a body of laws under which a meeting would be conducted, public meetings. I'm not sure if they use it in the legislature or not, but they might use it at City Hall or something like that, the school board. And it's called Robert's Rules of Orders. And one of the fundamental principles of that body of law is that everyone is to have a voice. Everyone is to have the opportunity to speak. But maybe when it comes to your opportunity to speak, you yield the floor to someone else. That actually happens every testimony meeting. I dare say many people wanted to testify tonight, but you yielded and in your mind you thought, well, I'll let that one testify. Well, sometimes we yield too much, I suppose, in that regard. But it's one thing to yield in traffic or yield in public meetings and all that, but it's another thing to yield to God. Amen. And that's what the text is speaking of here. Paul knew about yielding. At one point, as the Lord spoke to him, when it came time for that call, it came his way, he told him, it's hard for thee to kick against the pricks. Referring to that goad, I guess they call it, where they would direct a mule or an animal. And if the animal resisted the prodding, it's like he worked against that rather than yield to it. Paul was refusing to yield to what God was demanding. Well, later on, he learned to yield. In fact, he said at one point, what things were gained to me, those I counted loss for Christ. Amen. Anything that I aspired to, anything I had to my credit, I yielded. I gave it up. And that's what the Lord calls us to do. You may have certain aspirations or plans for your life. If you're going to be successful in your spiritual walk, you will yield those to the Lord. You will relinquish control of them. It's kind of like a right-of-way. You might own property, and perhaps just due to the way the property works, perhaps there exists on that title what they call a right-of-way, where you, though you're the property owner, must yield to the privilege of someone else who has to go through your property to get to theirs. In fact, I noticed at the funeral for Brother Weinberg, when Brother Ivan brought up the property dispute between Brother Louis, for those of you who weren't here, and the other owner, Brother Ivan brought out how that dispute was resolved when there was a garage on the borderline built in the wrong spot and so on and so forth, and could have been some sort of a controversy. But Brother Louis avoided the controversy by simply having the border redrawn, paid for the surveying and the whole works, just to avoid a problem. Yeah. What was he doing? He was yielding. Yeah. Well, you have the opportunity to do that every day, not only with the Lord, but with one another. In fact, Paul taught it. He, talking about these legal matters, he wrote to the Corinthian church. And there was a problem that had arisen in the church where brother was taking brother to the law of the unjust, of the heathen. So you had a brother in the Lord and you had a disagreement about something and it could not be resolved, so you went outside the church and went to the courts of unbelievers to resolve the matter. Well, Paul let them know that wasn't appropriate. And here's why. He said, now therefore there is utterly a fault among you, because you go to law one with another. Why do you not rather take wrong? Why don't you just yield? Why don't one of you just relinquish what you perceive to be your rights, or even what are your rights? Why not just yield? Give them up. And he continued, he said, why do you not rather suffer yourselves to be defrauded? Nay, ye do wrong, he told them. So it's a fact of life. If you learn to yield to God, you will be better able to yield to your brothers and sisters in the Lord, to your parents if you're a child, to every sense of authority, no matter who we are, to learn to yield. And we find that as we do that, it brings the blessing of God. Sometimes people yield involuntarily. It's kind of like when your kids are small. Some of you still have children. At least you hope they only do it when they're small. But they might quarrel over a toy or something. Quarrel over something. And so you try to instill in them the value of sharing. And so you say it's your brother's turn or your sister's turn. And typically, at least in our home it was typical, there was somewhat of resistance to learning that lesson of sharing. And they might yield, but might do it with a grudge or with reluctance. Well, I guess, like I say, it doesn't always only happen with children, and unfortunately, we want to know what it means to yield. I think of some of these prison letters that I read and respond to. Many of them are very, very cordial, but once in a while you come up against someone who claims, and you can tell by the tenor of the letter that they're guilty as can be, but claims that they were wrongly accused and things didn't work out and all that, and they have their rights and they're being violated and this kind of thing. Well, writing to the wrong guy if they want sympathy here as far as that goes. But what they did is they relinquished their rights, didn't they, upon being convicted of a crime? Well, I thought of that. Paul referred to himself as a prisoner of the Lord. Yeah. Now, those in the state pen have involuntarily relinquished their rights. But we who serve the Lord have voluntarily forfeited our rights. We have yielded the control of our lives to the one who really will do a better job of running them anyway. That's what it is to yield unto the Lord. Jesus taught it. Jesus did it when he said, not my will, but thine be done. And that's what we do. We come to the Lord and we say, not my will, Lord, but thine be done. That's the very hindrance for many of getting saved. We all did. We came up against, were we willing to relinquish the rights that we had to the order of our lives? Were we willing to forfeit control of what we perceive to be ours to govern? Well, until we do, we can't be saved. And unless we continue on a daily basis to yield unto the Lord, we won't have victory. But when we do those things, we have certain victory. Well, you yield all the way along. Remember when Debbie and I got married, I had a motorcycle. I sold it. And we used the money to buy a washer and dryer. And in my mind, I yielded that motorcycle. But in Debbie's mind, she probably yielded because she did the washing and the drying. So it's give and take all the way along. And we're mistaken if we think we're the one always giving, because it's not the way it works at all. We all must yield, and we see there's blessings to be sure. I remember, even before I knew anything about it, in terms of with the Lord, when He spoke to me and was calling after my heart, and I finally, well, not finally, I got saved that night when first experienced that call from heaven. But then there's a 2-month interval there between the time I was saved and the time that I knew where to go to church, and all that time. And during those times, there was some spiritual battles going on. And the Lord was trying to get me to yield. Of course, I wasn't unwilling to yield. I just didn't know what to do. But there was one thing. And it was really quite amazing, because I wasn't, during that time, didn't know the ways of the Apostolic Faith Church. Didn't even know, I was living in Corvallis, didn't know there at first that there was even a church in Dallas or in Portland. I would have gladly made the trip if I'd have known what to do and all of that. So I was kind of knocking around there in the dark in terms of knowing how to proceed. But there was a nagging thought going on in my mind. And that was, would I preach the gospel? Well, I didn't know anything about it hadn't even progressed to the point where I would know how that would even come about. I didn't know, but I wasn't worried about all that part. I hadn't got beyond the thought that nagging thought kept going through. Would I do it? Would I do it? Would I do it? And I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. And this went on for a period of weeks. And I may have, by that time, connected into a meeting or two. Long about my first meeting after I saved was Mother's Day there in Dallas. So that was 1974. But I still remember, I don't really remember where I was. It wasn't a church, I know that. But I still remember that when I prayed and when I finally yielded to the Lord. I guess the hesitancy was represented such a drastic change from what I was and all that. Who knows what goes on in your mind, but I do recall yielding that, relinquishing the control of my life and whatever. And oh my, everything just opened up at that point, and I began to serve the Lord, and I didn't worry any more about that. Even later on, when people asked me if I was called to preach, wasn't a bit troubled by it. I figured that was up to somebody else other than me, and that's the way it was. So whether it's that part, and that's said it before probably, but it's overrated in those terms, because God isn't looking so much for preachers as He is for Christians and people to fill all kinds of gaps along the way. But we must be willing to yield to what. And I know that the Lord reaches in during meetings and touches people's hearts. He reaches out and the preacher doesn't know a thing about it. I know that. In fact, here in the last few weeks, I've had 2 different people come up to me to straighten some things out in their own mind. And in both cases, I felt they didn't owe anything to me in terms of any explanations or straightening them out, but they knew that I had been involved in dealing with a certain issue each different time, and came up to me. The last one, God had showed that no headway would be made until that matter was rectified in their mind. Well, I'll tell you what, I long forgot about each of those cases, and it wasn't any issue to me, and I still say no, nothing was due to me to begin with. But it did show me one thing: the Lord was reaching in, and 2 individuals, a whole lot more that I wouldn't know about, were willing to yield to the Lord. What blessings come to those who do that? Why, and that's not only to God, but to one another. In fact, you go on here where Peter wrote. He says, likewise, ye younger, submit yourselves to the elder. Yea, all of you be subject one to another. And once in a while you say, well, I have my rights. They've been violated. You might even do that in traffic. Why, you have the right of way and somebody cuts you off, and that's not right. Well, what are you going to do about it? I'll tell you what you can do about it. You can yield. And you don't only do that in traffic, you do that in everyday life. And you'll never regret having yielded. And I'll ask you that. Can you look back over your life and look at a point in time where, well, you know, it really wasn't due, but you determined, I'm just going to yield that. Now, can you look back and see something where you regretted that you did it? No, not at all. You'll never regret just having yielded it. Yield it as unto the Lord. The Bible teaches, Peter taught, that we commit things such as that to the one who judges righteously. You won't forget it. You won't regret it. You might forget it, but you won't regret it. You know, if you learn to yield to the Lord, you'll even be a better driver out there on the freeways. You really will. Yeah, and even if you choose to avoid the freeways, you can't avoid the necessity of yielding. Debbie chastised me the other day at a 4-way stop, and her chastising isn't bad, so we don't have to worry about that. But we got there, and different ones at pretty much the same time, and of course you know how it goes, where people sit and wait, and I probably wasn't the first one there, but people were hesitating, and I felt like if we were going to hold a debate, I was going to move on and let them do it without me, and so I did. So I didn't do a very good job of yielding at that point. But you do find out that what is the initial reaction in your heart when controversy arises or something comes up? Are you going to rise up and say, now, wait a minute here? Or is there going to be something within you that yields? This whole thing here in Romans 6 is all about sanctification, really. In fact, in Romans 12:1, where you hear the verse that we are to present our bodies living sacrifices unto God, that word present in the original is the same word that's translated yield several times here in Romans 6. We are to yield our lives unto God. And you find out here that we are to yield our members, our entire life, as servants of righteousness. He speaks in here about the fact that we have changed the masters. He says, know ye not in 16 that to whom ye yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants ye are. Used to be servants of sin. Used to yield to Satan. But now you've learned to yield to God because you were willing to lay down your life and let the Lord live in you. Well, the Lord wants you to yield to Him today. And the Lord wants you to yield to others today. Don't let your lack of yielding to God or to someone else hinder your spiritual progress. If it's hindering, well, it looks like the Lord has got His finger on something again then. And there's one way to get the victory over it, and that is to deal with it. Yield it. Relinquish control. Relinquish your rights. Give it to God, and you'll see that victory will follow. It'll follow every time. You get down to pray, and the thing that maybe has nagged you from time to time, or maybe nagged you continually, is all gone. While you're just free as a bird in the sky. There's free sailing. There's free praying. There's victory all along the way, and all it takes really is yielding. And they might talk about it at the brickyard too, because they're going to notice a change in your life. They're going to notice that there's something different about you. Well, there's victory if we just yield. Let's do it tonight. 161's our song. Let's come and pray.